Good evening, everybody. My name is Corky. I'm with Yolo Basin Foundation, and I'm excited this evening to be hosting our wildlife area manager, Joe Hobbs. Joe's going to be sharing with us tonight about some of the updates for the Yolo Bypass Wildlife Area. I also want to make sure that you are aware of what's going on next month. So next month in Flyway nights, we're going to be hearing from the Assistant Director of Operations at Ecosystem Investment Partners. Stephanie Freed will be sharing with us about the Lookout Slough Tidal Habitat Restoration and Flood Improvement Project that's going on in the Delta. So our wildlife area, of course, connects to the Delta. And so we'll be hearing about what's going on there. So I do want to come back to Joe and have him share with us this evening about what's happening in the Yolo Bypass Wildlife Area. I have Joe here spotlit up. All right, welcome, Joe. Thanks for coming tonight.
Thanks, Corky. Thanks, Martha. So I'm Joe Hobbs. I'm the area manager for the Yolo Bypass Wildlife Area. I'll start my presentation here in a minute and go over a lot of it's just repetitive stuff, just the general management. Then I'll go into the updates about what's new, the projects that we did, what could be possibly coming up. The funnest part for me, or probably the most informative for most people, is questions. So if you think of a question along the way, write it down, ask it. It's the best way to get information, is to ask those questions. So I'm gonna go ahead and start the presentation. See if I can do this correctly. Okay, can you see that?
Yes, we can see it. Thanks, Joe.
Okay, let me find my things. Page. Again, so I'm Joe Hobbs. I'm the area manager. I've been a permanent employee with the department since 2000, 23 years. Prior to that, as an undergraduate and graduate student assistant with the department through college. And then in between those two positions, I did that for 5 years. I worked for Ducks Unlimited in wetland restoration and enhancement down in Los Banos in the grasslands. And then I worked at McDonald's in high school. So fun fact. Okay, let's see. So the Bay Delta region, which is where Yolo is on the very eastern extreme edge of that. In fact, it used to be in Region 2, but we are part of the Bay Delta region right there. In this region, there are numerous other wildlife areas and ecological reserves. Us and Grizzly Island Wildlife Area are the two that have permanent staff on the, assigned to those. Other ones are basically we call unstaffed lands for the most part. They don't have permanent staff. Napa Sonoma does, but there's only one basically permanent employee working there. So the Yolo Basin is a natural basin at the north edge of the Sacramento Delta. It's about 80,000 acres, or basically just on the edge of the Delta. Let me see if I can move something around so I can read stuff. So in 1997, the Yolo Bypass Wildlife Area opened to the general public. At that time, it was a much smaller area, I think roughly 3,500 acres. And over the years, they've expanded the wildlife area with acquisitions from the Wildlife Conservation Board. So in 2001, they bought another 12,000 acres from various ranches. And by 2005, they had a total of 16,700 acres, which is where we are now, roughly 2.2 square miles. So the wildlife area itself, every day except for Christmas, is open sunrise to sunset. So we have people that open the gate on the top. That's a DWR, Department of Water Resources gate. It is not our gate to allow the general public in. And then we lock that gate as well at sunset. Christmas, we are closed. I never thought this was anything to think about until I actually had to schedule staff to open and close that gate. In the summer, it doesn't get dark till 9 o'clock. Holidays, weekends, all that stuff. It just becomes another something to deal with. So we have a 7.5 mile auto tour loop for the general public. On this loop, there are no bikes, horses, or dogs. I have ran into people with horses, with dogs, and with bikes. The area north of the freeway, that small section between the freeway and the railroad tracks, You can have dogs and bikes there. It is also part of an active grazing lease. So we are open to hunting, waterfowl, pheasant, and dove, with waterfowl being the most popular, and fishing, as well as wildlife viewing, nature viewing. And then also we have about 4,000 plus students. It's been lower in COVID years, and 8,000 hunters that visit the wildlife area every single year. So as far as trails, there are just a little over 18 miles of trails that are available outside of the winter hunting area. This is done, they go down to 2.8 miles of trails. So we have some of those trails are in the hunt area and some of those are in our closed zones. And it's a trade-off between trying to provide basically disturbance-free areas for wildlife, basically wintering waterfowl, to access and have people view those, and then still allow all the other activities on the wildlife area. But you'll see a big reduction during the winter for the availability of trails. Again, like I said, we're open to hunting and fishing. Obviously, that picture is not taken at the bypass wildlife area. That was taken on Lake Tahoe. The other popular activities are wildlife viewing and nature study. We have a tremendous amount of use all throughout the year for people coming out to bird watch or just watch nature in general. So the Yolo Basin Foundation is responsible for the education and outreach, in the Yolo bypass wildlife area. They basically provide the service that the department can't. We do have a part-time employee that assists with that, but we can never match what they do with the number of people that they do for the education with the kids. So they're responsible, the foundation, for the Discover the Flyway. So it's been over 71,000 students since 1997 when it was first began. The surrounding counties and school districts all participate. The other thing that the foundation, leads is the Bat Walks and Talks. It is by far the single most sought after activity, if you will, on the wildlife area. It's very popular. It's super fun. That goes from July through September, about 50 tours each year. Again, we're going to be back up to full speed again this year. 3,000 plus people. They offer both public and private tours. This is just a photo of where the bats roost in the causeway. This is underneath the freeway, I-80, thousands and thousands of people cross that every single day. And there's a huge colony of bats that roost underneath that. Part of the thing that makes Yolo wildlife area unique is we do have wildlife friendly agriculture. The value from our leases is over $700,000 per year. We have 3 different leases. We have 2 grazing leases. One is in our southern area. That's the biggest one. And then we have one that's maybe 500-600 acres. It's basically between the causeway, freeway, and the railroad track, and a little bit of ground on the other side of the railroad track. But that's in for grazing. And the majority of these activities are managed by the Yolo Resource Conservation District. We work in conjunction with them for the leases. So we meet with the rice farmer, the grazer several times a year, or if anything comes up, we meet with them as well. These dollars that they generate fund the operation and maintenance, a portion of the operation and maintenance of the wildlife area. That dollar is part of a larger grant through the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service called the Pittman-Robertson's Act. It is a PR grant. It is an excise tax on sporting arms and ammunition. So that money there is matched by the feds, 3 to 1 roughly. And so the rice on the wildlife area is about 2,000 acres, plus or minus a few acres. And part of the rice lease, which all the leases are 5-year leases, or they have to manage 150 acres of shorebird habitat each year. And so they take rice out of production, they shallow flood it. It's divided into 2 time periods, basically 75 acres each, roughly, depending on the field size. 30 days in July, and 30 days in August. They'll flood that very shallow for the benefit of shorebirds on the wildlife area. And it kind of rotates around. One of the fields has to be close to an auto tour route or it's visible by the public, but it also varies by what meets their needs. Or if we have projects, we want to keep a pond or a rice field dry, we may put that for a good portion of the year in shorebird habitat and then put water on it for 30 days. Rice is very wildlife friendly, especially waterfowl friendly. So it's used throughout basically the whole season that it has water on it all year. We have 2 different main varieties of rice, white rice, there are numerous varieties of white rice, and wild rice. White rice is much shorter. Here's an example, and it's harvested dry. As where wild rice is much taller, it has a shorter growing period, so it's 90 days, and it can better handle the cooler season or cooler summer evenings in the causeway or the bypass. Depending on flooding years, again, since it's a shorter crop, it's easier to get on and off and within harvest. And unlike white rice, it's harvested wet, so they have special machines to go in there while the fields are still flooded and harvest those wild rice while they're wet. You can see right after the harvester goes through, you have ibis, egrets, and other wildlife that come in and are going to basically maximize their opportunity to feed on everything left behind by the rice harvester. And then, so after they're done harvesting, the rice leasee may basically either mow those fields, disc those fields, or start the prep for next year. And so sometimes he can do it, sometimes he can't. This year he got some of them done, didn't get others, and then we'll go in and then flood up right behind his post-harvest activities and make that available for wintering waterfowl as they arrive in the fall and early winter. Then you see, now I was out there today and the water is definitely coming off, and we just have a ton of swans. They like the deeper water. It's still deeper in the rice fields right now because it hasn't fully come off. So we just got a lot of activity by swans. The other grazing or leases that we have are grazing. So our pasture, about 5,000 acres roughly in active grazing, both irrigated and dryland. The one thing in this whole Central Valley is water in the summer. If you're not in a rice field, is very hard to come by. So putting water out on irrigated pastures, briefly flushing it and letting that soak in provides a bunch of benefit for wildlife. And the other thing that wildlife like is those irrigated pastures about this time of year, late winter, early spring. There's no more cattle on those. And those pastures are basically germinating. It's really nutritious growth, and the geese just love those. And so the other activity or grazing benefit is in our vernal pool area, which is in the very far southwestern portion. Is the grazing keeps down the annual exotic plants and promotes, the native plants, the native wildflowers that you'll see in the vernal pool areas. So for Yolo, it's pretty unique. So first and foremost, it is a flood control conveyance. It is bypassing water around Sacramento. So Sacramento does not flood. So within that, we are allowed to have, basically agriculture, wildlife habitat, and public use, be it, bird watching, hunting, nature viewing, fishing, you name it. So all those are within the bypass. And for me, wetland management basically equals water management. And it's a little bit more difficult in the bypass because we get situations like we had this last month where we got inundated wall to wall. Luckily, it wasn't super deep, 15 feet deep. There are pluses and minuses to that as far as it's actually better for damage control when it's super deep and not just over the top of levees. That is a lot more erosion. So we're trying to move water around. Some of you that have heard this before, beavers in the lower right, they're such a unique creature that can wreak havoc on my water control structures. They are much better than we are at getting water to where they want it to go. And they don't take breaks. They're not off on the weekend, and they will do what they want to do. And they're very darn good at it. And they don't even have thumbs. So if I get my staff to work as hard as beavers did, this job would be super, super easy. Basically, water management. Various types of pumps. We have pump stations, and you see the pump stations are elevated because when it does flood, it can flood 15 feet deep. So those pumps that are electric have to be above that water line. And it's low lifted from the tow drain, which is on the east side of our wildlife area. And we move water around through gravity after that. But these swales, you'll see in one of the slides here, are basically just depressions that go from the entrance to the exit of those ponds. It allows us to efficiently move water instead of having to back it all the way up and push it back to the top end. It allows us to put that basically on benches and get that water moved across the wildlife area. There are various types of water control structures. It's an example of a screw gate, which is a big metal flap over a pipe. You can raise it, lower it. Some of them will have cement structures attached to that. You put boards in, you can set water at a certain level. We also have certain endangered species, snowy plovers, giant gutter snakes, Swainson's hawk, some fairy shrimp, all, basically contribute to the complexity of management within the bypass. And then we have, this isn't from this last year, but we have obviously flooding, when water is going around Sacramento, makes management a little bit more difficult than you would in a normal piece of property. So one thing I'm always working on, and like that's my major, probably number one complaint, is road maintenance. It's all year long. We have high visitor use. We have farm equipment, heavy, big equipment that are using our roads and infrastructure, and they all take their toll on it. And when that toll is really exaggerated, is once that road gets wet, every single pothole, every single dip is just that much more of an issue. I do have a new grader. I got it the last year. It's great. I don't have an operator. I was able to borrow my operator again. He was able to take some of the big potholes out. Unfortunately, then it just never stopped raining. And so now it was smoother, but muddy. So it seems like I can't win on road maintenance. Again, this example of the heavy equipment from the ag uses that are using our roads and infrastructure. Inundation, flooding. This is typical. It's probably looked like this last couple of weeks. This is the parking lot at parking lot G, which is where the Los Rios check jam is at Puda Creek. We developed a sinkhole over this last year. I was hoping to squeak by this winter before I had to address it. That sinkhole got bigger and bigger and bigger. What happened is the pipes underneath this parking lot, this roadway that bisects the wildlife area in half, basically rusted out over time. It was eroding underneath this parking lot. And those pipes are pretty deep. We're hoping, okay, we can get by because they're 15 feet underground. But with all the rain, everything's saturated, they just continue to deteriorate and get bigger. We're able to fill them in, make them safe, but this is actually post-flooding. This is last week. They're still, that pole that he's holding is probably at least 8 feet long. So there's a good number of safety issues with some of these holes. This goes through the middle of the wildlife area that people would have to drive through. They have to be addressed before we can safely open back up. If you can see this is the new project we did. And I'll go over that in a little bit, but this is basically the road that goes to parking lot H over the canal. The water came around a levee we raised and is basically eroding that road system across the canals. It cut off 6 to 10 inches on a portion of that road, so it's not safe to get to the parking lot H right now. This water is no longer over that levee or that road, but it's still fairly high. So one of the other questions I get a lot is, where does that water come from? So the water that we use for majority of the wildlife uses and ag uses comes from our eastern portion of the wildlife area, the tow drain. That water is pushed up behind Lisbon Weir through tidal action. And then it's basically trapped behind that weir and then slowly released through elevation sets on that weir. We're able to low lift it with these pumps, like this pump station, and then we gravity feed it out from there. There's a couple areas you have to lift it again just because of the elevation of the ponds. But majority of our water comes from there. We have a couple deep wells, but we don't use them that much. Most of that, the ones that we use are for irrigated pastures when we can't use water from the creek. Again, you think your PG&E cost is high. My pumping costs are at least $300,000 each year. Everyone's probably noticed our PG&E bill has gone up. Yes, so is mine. There's probably more than that now, and I really don't even want to look at it. But and there is no increase in my budget when my PG&E bill goes up. Something else has got to give. So this last several years, we've done quite a few infrastructure projects. We both work with Ducks Unlimited and California Waterfowl Association. They tend to be the entities that deliver those projects. So the funding that we get is basically put through Ducks Unlimited to engineer and project oversight. Same thing with CWA to deliver those projects. So what you saw in 2020 was the beginning of several larger projects that were part of the Ducks Unlimited run through. So we had new bridges. You saw that at the Y and by the airstrip. New pump, or basically the pump was moved at the Y for realignment. They cleaned out some ditches. They put a new pump system in the Parker unit that wasn't there before. to basically restore wetlands. And in 2021, it was a lot milder for the projects going through Ducks Unlimited. They cleaned out over a mile of ditch. They're all tying together to help get water. And water movement is very critical for the wildlife area, on and off the wildlife area in an efficient manner, so it does not flood out both the ag and the wetlands at times. So this last year, what the big project was cleaning out Greens Lake. So they took those spoils, I'll go over it again in some other slides, and then raised a road system and then gravel on top of that. They pulled a bunch of our pumps that are inefficient and then refurbished them. Some of those are still out getting parts, and they'll put those back in the early spring. Some of them are already back in, just it got too wet to be able to access those sites. And then a new pump system at parking lot H where that road was watching out. They got the basin in, but not the electricity or the pump. So they'll finish that this next year. So they're going to finish the pumps, install a new pump at parking lot H, and hopefully a bunch of gravel to help with my road system and access those pumps that they refurbished. Again, this picture from before, this is the pump or the bridge at the Y. So it's the first bridge you cross to as you come into a wildlife area before you get to parking lot B. This is the Parker unit. Again, they put in a basin, a new pump station, ran electricity to it. And this shows you where that Parker unit is, that little square in the lower left, highlighted in red or outlined in red. And that cross is where that pump is, a little X. And that was all we couldn't get water there on a regular basis. So the new pump system allows us to restore those back into wetlands. So again, this kind of highlights the area where they did these projects last year. You'll see in the yellow towards the middle top, that's the edge of Greens Lake. Again, they took numerous long reach excavators, reached into the lake, pulled out spoils. That little cross hatching with yellow and orange looks like a B. They cleaned out that. And that purple area, the road going straight down, and then to the west is the road system along with that yellow road that they raised to put gravel on as part of that whole Greens Lake project clean out. So this is a kind of an aerial, gives you an example of the long reach excavator reaching out as far as they can into Greens Lake. This doesn't really show, and the next slide will, but they just didn't lay that muddy stuff right back on the road. Basically, they had to put it in a separate spot, let it dry out, and then handle it again, put it back in trucks, lay it on the road, compact it, water it, and then gravel it later. So this gives you an example, like this little triangle area that they put all those spoils, loaded into trucks, dumped on here, let it dry out, pick it up again, put it back on the road system, water it, compact it, and then gravel it in the end. And they were working up to the last day that they had under our special size species work window for giant garter snakes to be able to get and finish at least a majority of this project. So show you there's a compactor. You can see in the background, there's the dump truck that hauls the dirt, the soil. It's being compacted. This is now the best road I have on my wildlife area. It is super compacted and it's got a lot of gravel on it, which is great. The gravel's really loose right now, but it will compact in over time. You can see the water truck there right behind the compactor. And this is just from a couple months ago before you got rain. You can see the edge of the gravel on that road system. But it basically increases the capacity of Greens Lake, which is used as storage for water for both wetland management and rice management. It basically acts as a buffer, put water into Greens Lake, raise the lake level, and put the water out from there into the rice or into the wetlands. And so this shows you at parking lot H where that new pump station is partially installed. So basically took out a little section of rice in that parking lot. You can see that they're beginning to work on it right here in this picture. They excavated that out, put in the basin again, and then put piping system in there. Eventually this will have a pump on it next year. It allows us, as water is draining, to get that into the canal system and off the wildlife area. Basically de-water the rice and then take water off the wetlands when we need to, specifically on years when we may be partially flooded and the water normally wouldn't come off. Now we can basically low lift it out, get an early start on either the rice or the wetlands for moist soil plants. Again, last photo of that. Well, I think there's one more. this is one of the pipe systems from that this year. They're actually supposed to cut grooves in these plastic pipes because they will float. They'll allow water in them. They did not do that on this pipe. But if that's the only thing that happened on this project, then that's fine. We'll fix that as soon as we can this spring. So this shows you where some of our pump towers are. The ones highlighted in yellow were slated for refurbishment with either DU or CWA. So we got the 52 pump up north, right below that 55, and the south pump, the 48 well, and then the Duck Club one, which is on the very south end of the system or of our wildlife area. So we have our pumps tested every 2 years for efficiency. Many of these pump systems that have been here for a long time are in the 30, maybe 40% efficiency rating, which basically means I'm burning dollars, the same amount of water. We refurbish them, they can get into the 75 to 80% efficiency, basically doubling my efficiency and cutting my PG&E costs down, which saves me money that I can use elsewhere on the wildlife area. So, and then a few years ago, we did some pollinator habitat, upland habitat. We took 70 acres out of rice and put it into pollinator habitat. So these two fields that are highlighted there, it was planted, the groundwork was done by CWA, and it was planted by them into creeping wild rye, blue wild rye, slender wheatgrass, and then River Partners came in and planted pollinator species. Besides, we actually tried to irrigate it because it was in a drought. We ended up flooding it out. And so River Partners came in this last year and actually replanted some of the pollinator rhizomes in both those fields. You may have saw a huge number of flags. They went and mowed some of the vegetation that they didn't need on those higher areas, replanted, which actually had extra money, which never happens. So I'm really thankful for that. They were able to come back, and hopefully those pollinators now continue to take off. The grasses that were planted, flooding didn't really hurt them. They did really good, but the rhizomes didn't do as well in the drought and the flooding. Again, so California Waterfowl, we use them a lot to help with our habitat enhancement projects. So they did some projects now this year in the Martins unit and some other areas as well. Very south end of the wildlife area. They restored or put in some brood ponds, enhanced some uplands, put in some new levees to help us manage water better. Again, new delivery system down there as well. And then they cleaned out sections of delivery ditch, both there on the very south end and some other areas of the wildlife area, put some new water control structures in to help us more efficiently manage water. And they're pulling one of the pump stations down there that's critical for us to refurbish those pump systems as well. The other thing that's going on is the Poudre Creek salmon. So salmon do want to come up Poudre Creek, but there is a basically dam there that's put in April that backs water up for use both on the outside of the wildlife area for ag, and then we use it to flood up wetlands. And it's a barrier at times to salmon. So we're working with several different partners on this project to do a basically salmon enhancement. Solana County Water Authority, Poudre Creek Council, the Yolo Basin Foundation is involved, and Poudre Creek Trout. So this is at the check dam itself, which is in parking lot G, which has the sinkhole. This is looking to the west. And those boards are basically below where this picture was taken from. They're put in April, backs the water up, ag uses it for irrigation outside, and then we use it if we need to move water for wetlands. At a certain point, we stop taking water off of this, and we'll use our well for the irrigated pasture. But this was the concept that was developed to basically do a short run bypass. And you can see in the middle of that is the parking lot G, kind of dead center, kind of yellowish is the actual check dam bridge that goes across that section of Poudre Creek. And this was to take water around above the dam and then drop it back down through a series of stair steps into Poudre Creek below the dam. This will allow the salmon to come up that area where those boards are in. Solana County is going to put more water through that system to account for that. Then you can see in the red area there, I'll show you some pictures from there. But we also used it because this water that was undercutting parking lot G needed a place to go. CBA did the groundwork, basically cut the canal. In the next couple of years, we'll finish up, make it fish friendly to take those stair steps in and complete that bypass. But this is looking from that area in red to the basically north. And you can see where that is basically the road that you go to the parking lot G on, where this picture is taken from. Turn around, look towards Poudre Creek. That's from there. So it's all rock. And this one actually held up really well with the flooding. It worked. It diverted all that water that overflowed from Poudre Creek that's coming from our area to the west, around the parking lot and back into the Poudre Creek to drop back down. Again, CDFW did a bunch of water or ditch clean outs. We have a problem with primrose and all our water delivery and drainage ditches. We spray it, but we just can't keep up on it. And it basically traps silt, and the silt basically falls out and lowers the capacity of all our water conveyance systems. So they cleaned those out, did a bunch of those. And the other thing that mentioned, like Josh Martinez had talked about last month, was the Fremont Weir, the Big Notch project. This has the potential to impact the flooding regime on the Yolo bypass wildlife area, basically increasing the duration of flooding. Typically what it's going to do, again, I'm just summarizing briefly, is add additional days of flooding before and after, like not a natural, but a flood event that would be caused by a Fremont Weir overtopping. So it's going to increase the number of days that we'd be flooded, and impact, basically visitor use on the wildlife area. And we're working with DWR to mitigate these potential impacts through projects and the MOU with them. You can see at the very top of that is a Fremont Weir, and in the middle of that, in the green, is the Yolo bypass wildlife area. Again, same kind of overview. You can see again at the top, the Fremont Weir, and then Yolo in the middle. And this actually points out Lisbon Weir, which is about 2/3 of the way down our wildlife area. And that's the structure that backs water up after tidal pushes it past us. It goes all the way up basically to the freeway, and we lift that up and push that out across the wildlife area. Again, this is a picture of what the whole project when it's finished will look like. You can see the Fremont Weir overflow on that side. And then if you look upper left, that's going to be where the water goes back to the south towards Yolo bypass wildlife area. This year we actually had a bunch of signs made. Was able to order some metal. Our screen shop, which is actually on site, but it's not part of the same region, was able to find time to cut some signs. We have a whole bunch of these that these are going to be putting out to help people know exactly where they are, what's where. More directional signage, which is definitely needed on the wildlife area. So hopefully with the next couple months, my staff will be able to get those in after they finish dealing with all the road damage and the flooding. And then we'll, again, have a few more extra signs for people, tell them where they go. So in addition to those directional signage, we have a bunch of interpretive signs that came in. These signs are about 3 by 5 roughly. They're pretty big. We'll be putting those out as well. There's several of those different signs: bats, pollinators, agricultural and biodiversity. You'll see these on the wildlife area in this next year. Maybe not exciting to everybody else, but it is to me, as they will actually get new equipment the last couple of years. This is a small disc that we got. It's great. It helps us get in tight areas. We have a slightly larger disc with fold-out wings, and actually what's towed behind that is a ring roller. So it makes big clots, and these ring rollers break those clots down. I have ordered a new excavator. This is a long reach excavator. It's like $430,000. Our old one, the duct tape finally broke, so hopefully we can get this within the next year. So this is going through our state's lovely and efficient purchasing process. We also got a new mower, which is great. Our other mowers are fairly old, so when they break, we'll have something to replace stuff with, get them repaired, and never lose any days in the actual field. New tractor should show up in the spring. Again, very exciting to me, maybe not to everybody else, but it's nice to have equipment that is reliable. What I also got was a new grader this last year. Again, I don't have a picture of that. It's actually right now it's at Grizzly Island Wildlife Area. They borrowed it. They have an operator, so they're grading their roads. When they bring it back, they'll try to get on our roads once they dry out a little bit more. I mean, that's basically the end of the presentation. At this point, again, questions, if anybody has anything, that would be helps me a lot.
Thanks, Joe. It's great. Lots of stuff going on out there. We do have a question that's come in,
Okay.
which I think we anticipated because we chatted right before. Marge Kohler would like to know, when do you think the wildlife area will be open to the public?
Yeah, so I'm hoping like this weekend typically is our junior hunt weekend, and next weekend the veteran hunt week. We will not be open for the junior hunt weekend. There's still too much damage, still some roads that are not safe to access. I am hoping within the next week or two to be able to open the auto tour portion of the wildlife area so people can go into birds and keep them basically stopping at the hunter check station so they don't go to the areas that are damaged that we're going to be working on. That's my goal. Most of those roads they're safe to drive. There's just still some areas that are wet. There's a low area as you come by the second bridge going south towards parking lot C or the check station. That's low, so that had water on it a very long time. I drove on it today, probably shouldn't have. It's still a little dicey, but I'm hoping to let that open up in the next couple of weeks for sure. Barring any other major rain events, we're supposed to rain the next 3 days, but it doesn't look like a lot, so that shouldn't really be a deciding factor. It's not going to help, but it shouldn't hurt that much because it's not like it's going to be inches on each day or anything like that.
Kind of tied to that, then, do you think it's going to be an issue for city streetcars?
For what, Corky?
Just regular people's cars.
It's not going to be pretty. I would drive my friend's car, but there's still some major potholes, and until it dries out enough, there's two things. Those the areas that we didn't grade before are hard and then potholey. The areas we are grade are loose and silty. So it's going to be accessible, but use your best judgment. You're not going, once it dries out enough, not going to get stuck, but just make sure you take caution when you drive.
All right. And follow up on the new equipment that you have. Do you have staff to operate the new equipment?
So the tractor, the disc, all that, yes. The new excavator, it's a learning curve. They don't require the different driver's license as some of the other equipment in the past. They just need to be trained on it. The staff has run the old excavator. This is the long range, a little bit different. I have, again, I'm short one permanent position. I'm trying to fill that right now. I couldn't fill it the last 2 years. So it's basically now a limited term position for a wildlife tech, which is an entry level. So I'm hoping I can fill that and basically train somebody up to operate all the equipment, to get them, and then hopefully convert that into a permanent position in the future.
And then a comment for you. Thank you for everything you do to improve the habitat and the hunting. Our next question from Marilyn here is, thank you for your management. And is the monarch habitat area flooded out? Will work continue with this project? Yeah,
so it's flooded, but the good part is most of the species that they're supposed to have planted, at least for the grasses, can be flood tolerant. So hopefully it wasn't on super deep or super long, basically just called a long irrigation where they're dormant anyway. So we're hoping if we don't flood again and go 10 feet deep for a month, that all those species that they planted will be able to be established, go on. I would really like, once it dries out, another month, get scattered rains to really get them established. But I don't think this flooding was enough in duration to basically kill those plants. You look now, stuff is just greening up left and right. I mean, some of those plants that were already there, it didn't even think. Every species is a little bit more tolerant to what it can take as far as flooding. But because they were planted, they hadn't sprouted yet. I think they should be pretty good.
You had a lot of work done just south of the causeway as well. How are those roads looking?
So several other road system, they're actually not bad. If no one drives on when they're wet, they should be good. But you can see it from the causeway. I drive home. There were some cattails, like maybe 100-yard stretches. We have several other areas of the wildlife area that just deposited cattails on top of that road system. One of them is our road in our very south end. So Matt's been working with the backhoe to try to remove that. We weren't really sure how to deal with that because that hasn't happened it basically, cattails floated in. It's on the edge of our property. There's a barbed wire fence there. It wasn't super deep, so it couldn't float over it. And then when it dropped, they all just dropped on the road for like 200 yards. And you could not drive over those in a car. So Matt was able to try. It's like we weren't sure if we were going to have to burn them. Tried to get basically a furrow rake, ag rake, and try to get them off that road. He was able to take the backhoe because it's got an articulated thumb, and push those out and not really lose our gravel. And it did a pretty good job. So it looked like it worked. And so I think once that causeway unit dries up enough, you can get the backhoe in there, dries out, and we get the cattails off of there. So.
Looked like it also got caught up on the fence on the west side. It just sort of where the not the entrance to the wildlife area, but the other gate, and just below the levee there was a fence.
Yeah, you look around. There's we lost some fences on the ag units in the south. And this is what kind of bummer with the. I'd actually rather have it 10 feet deep because everything floats over it. And all my issues would go on the neighbors, and I'm friends with some of the neighboring ag users, but it's like, I wish, John, it would have floated onto yours and deposited on your field instead of my road, which typically it does in the past, but it doesn't seem like it's but there's some trees that floated in. There's a duck hunting blind that's now by the freeway pump. You can see it from the freeway if you're in a truck. They just floated in, cement, or not cement, it's steel. So there's that, but the major thing is when that water is just at or over the levees and the roads, that's just a road stuff. When that water finds that lowest spot and all that water is just ripping through a small area, not only will it just wash the gravel off, but it'll start eroding and then back eroding. And those are the situations where we see where the roads just, all of a sudden you have a 15-foot road that now is eroded on each end in a small area. It's 10 feet and no margin for error. And those are not so much on the main roads like in the auto tour, but they're on some of the other roads that we would access our south end, or you'll see those over to parking lot H or F, the old mercury ponds. The water control structure is back behind those all back eddied, and they eroded into the road. So you'll see like 4 feet between that water control structure, which used to be the edge of the road. Now it's just, it's 4 feet down. And then we'll try to fill those in, as time goes by. That road's still really good for the most part, but those definitely, you lost a lot of wiggle room on the roads to pass two cars and things like that.
So Chris would like to know, will we be able to go around Greens Lake and out to the east end of the causeway for the bat tours this summer?
You should be able to, I think like the route you sometimes take, Corky, where you go up along the edge of Greens Lake and then shoot to the west, or I'm sorry, east, should be able to go up along that. And that road system that they redid when they cleaned out that ditch on the north, that road should be good. So I say that, I guarantee nothing. Stuff happens, again, with a rice farmer, water goes where sometimes we don't want it to go. But that being said, I think we're a lot better than we were, or where we were the last 2 years as far as access. So I haven't been on those roads, those side roads, Corky, to see what kind of damage that did from the flooding. But the main roads, what I can see east-west by the causeway are good. And that Greens Lake Road is excellent. Until you drop off into the gravel.
So then I guess the other question is, what did the bats decide to do? And we'll have to check that out this summer as they moved last year.
I didn't really cover it because they're still in the early process. There is a freeway realignment there that may eventually either add another lane or something that's going to have to be an issue with the bats as well, as far as some other things too. So we'll see what that happens, but that's a Caltrans.
That's in 2025 is my understanding.
Yeah, they started it. They started the process, but okay. I don't have any updates on that one yet.
All right. So Brandon would like to know if you think Yolo will be open for the vet hunt based on what you're seeing.
60-40, no, at this point, we'll see. I don't know if people are familiar. My main guy, he's going to go out early next week, see what's safe, because they're still like in the very south end, go to parking lot M, it's still all flooded south of there and east of there. The tow drain is still out of its banks in certain areas. So what the situation is a lot of it is safe. Some of it is not. 95% of the people are fine. 5% are not. And I was telling Corky earlier, so if someone gets hurt and I have to go to court, and they say, well, did you think it was safe? And I come up with mostly, but they really wanted to hunt or really wanted to go out. That's not going to be why I get fired. It's going to be for much other things than that. So I want everyone, even the lowest common denominator that uses the area, to be safe. So what's nice with the vet weekend, you're not looking at a ton of people like we normally would have. We don't fill for that weekend. So we may be able to delineate certain area that we think is safe to keep people within those guidelines, that's easily to distinguish in the dark, and allow them hunt. We'll see. We'll look at it. It's been dropping every single day. Every day things are drying out. So that's good on that aspect, but we'll see what we're dealing with next week. I just don't want anybody to get hurt, and not while I'm in charge. So.
This is our chance. You want to talk about the building?
Which building?
Your building. Open.
Oh yeah, so the wildlife area. Thank you, Cordy. So we should be open back to the general public by the end of the month. All the other like regional offices and offices that sell actual licensed stuff, they are open now. So we still have I still have some staff teleworking, the front staff. So it's just a matter of the office will be open, like for people to use, come see the displays and things like that. We're just going to work on making sure we have staff there to actually lock the front doors and that type of stuff. But it should be back to normal. So bat tours, in-person stuff in the conference room, good to go after this month. So that aspect is good.
Yeah, be nice to begin to get a little bit
back
of
to
our kids back
normal.
to see our taxidermy.
Yeah.
Another question here: are there fish in Greens Lake?
There are, but that lake is rather sterile in my view. I mean, you're just not seeing a lot of stuff in there. I think stuff will be in there now when it gets trapped after flooding events. So one of the things, like to be able to work in Greens Lake within certain temperature, because salmon can get trapped in there, sturgeon can get trapped in there. So Ducks Unlimited had to basically monitor the temperature of that. So there's a certain threshold where salmon are just temperature-wise, you're just gonna die. So they couldn't work when it was under certain temperatures, and it didn't flood the last couple of years. That was nice because nothing else can be put in there, and it bakes over the summer. Like if they're gonna do work in that this next year, they'd have to, and stuff that could be deposited in there. But I don't see. It's funny. It's weird because I don't see a lot of waterfowl use from that. Even being a deeper lake, you can see some grebes, occasional coot or diver, but nothing like you'll see on even a deeper seasonal wetland. Gets tremendous more use than those permanent ponds. I think they just lack the nutrition, the vegetation to provide basically food sources for fish and wildlife.
All right. Lots of great information, Joe. Appreciate your time. Updates. Exciting to know what's going on in the bypass.
So probably again, and if anybody thinks of questions afterwards, call, email. The foundation has my email address. I don't mind questions at all. It doesn't bother me. People call. It's probably the funner part of my job is trying to answer questions. I may not always have the answer. I will always make up something. I will let you know that I'm kidding. Like I'm actually 6 feet tall, and a lot of people that work with me don't believe that, but I am. Again, feel free to email, call. You're not going to bother me. It's the funnest part of my job. So on that story, when I was interviewing for seasonal work this last year, it's all through Zoom this last year still. So I hired 2 scientific aides, both women. You don't know. So they're probably like 5'1". It's like much shorter than I thought. I hired another guy, Tim. He looked about my size. He walks in my office. I thought maybe he can wear my old uniforms. He's 6'2". I was like, that's not going to happen. It's going to be a half shirt on Tim. So that's my height joke because it made me laugh. I was like, oh my God, you're way taller than I thought when you're just sitting down at a table, because he was thin built. So, but again, call, email. It never bothers me.
I do want to remind everybody that for next month, that we're going to be learning about more restoration, but the restoration in the Delta, and then to kind of tie in a little bit to some of what you were saying, the last month of Flyway nights in April, we're going to be hearing from the RCD, from the Resource Conservation District, about the wildlife corridors. For those of you who were around in 2019, they were just starting them. And we heard at that point a little bit about them, but now those plants have grown substantially, and we've had a flooding event. So we'll get to hear how that's come through. So looking forward to both of those. And again, thank you, Joe, for
You're
coming
welcome.
and being with us tonight.
No problem. Thanks, everyone.
All right. Have a
Thanks,
great evening,
everybody.
everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.